Welcome to History with Herodotus, where we delve into the fascinating tales of the past. And today, we embark on an epic journey across the vast expanse of America's westward expansion. Imagine a land of untold riches, uncharted territories, and unparalleled adventure, where the bravest of explorers dared to tread, shaping the course of history. As we set out on this captivating narrative, the year is 1803, and the United States is poised on the brink of a revolutionary era that would forever alter its destiny. The air was alive with anticipation as the whispers of a new frontier beckoned to those who dared to dream big. It was Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, who harbored a grand vision to expand the American territory westward, doubling the size of the country. This ambitious dream was not born overnight. It was the culmination of years of diplomatic maneuvering and strategic planning. Jefferson's fascination with the western wilderness began during his early days as a lawyer and politician in Virginia, where he would often pore over maps and accounts of explorers who had ventured into the unknown. His foresight and perseverance paved the way for what would become one of the most significant events in American history. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803, negotiated with France for $15 million, was a masterstroke that would change the course of American destiny. Approximately 880,000 square miles of land west of the Mississippi River were acquired, effectively sealing the fate of America's expansionist policy. To explore this vast new territory, Jefferson commissioned the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1804. Led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, this daring venture aimed to map the western lands, establish trade with Native American tribes, and find a water route to the Pacific Ocean. Over 2 years and 4 months, they traversed over 7,000 miles, documenting the geography, geology, and indigenous cultures of the region. Their meticulous journals and maps would later serve as invaluable resources for future explorers and settlers. The duo's journey was not without its challenges. They faced treacherous terrain, harsh weather conditions, and encounters with hostile Native American tribes. Yet, their bravery, curiosity, and diplomacy allowed them to overcome these obstacles, forging a path that would be followed by countless others. As Lewis and Clark ventured into the unknown, another intrepid explorer, Zebulon Pike, led 2 expeditions to the west. In 1806 to 1807, he explored the southern parts of the Louisiana Purchase, including present-day Colorado and New Mexico. Pike's discoveries not only expanded American knowledge of the region, but also kindled interest in the potential for mineral wealth and trade opportunities. His bravery and curiosity epitomized the spirit of exploration that defined this era. Pike's expeditions were marked by a sense of wonder and awe as he encountered towering mountain ranges, vast prairies, and majestic rivers. His findings would later inspire a new generation of explorers, settlers, and entrepreneurs to venture into the American West. The early 19th century also saw the rise of the fur trade, with mountain men like John Jacob Astor, Kit Carson, and Jim Bridger playing pivotal roles as pathfinders. These rugged individuals, often employed by trading companies, ventured into the wilderness to trap beavers, hunt, and establish relationships with Native American tribes. Their exploits helped to open up new territories, facilitated trade, and provided crucial information about the geography and native populations of the West. The fur trade was a lucrative business, with beaver pelts being highly prized for their warmth and durability. However, it also came with its own set of challenges, including fierce competition, harsh weather conditions, and the ever-present threat of Native American attacks. As Americans pushed westward, they inevitably encountered various Native American tribes, each with their distinct culture, language, and traditions. The interactions between these two worlds were complex, often marked by a mix of cooperation, conflict, and misunderstandings. Government, in its initial attempts at territorial governance, established the Louisiana Territory in 1805, followed by the Missouri Territory in 1812. These administrative divisions aimed to provide a framework for managing the vast new lands and their inhabitants. However, the challenges of governing such expansive territories, coupled with the diverse needs and aspirations of both Native Americans and American settlers, would prove to be a lasting conundrum. The Native American tribes, who had lived in harmony with the land for centuries, were faced with the daunting prospect of adapting to a new reality, one that would forever alter their way of life. The period between 1803 and 1820 laid the groundwork for America's westward expansion, setting in motion a chain of events that would forever reshape the nation. The visions of leaders like Jefferson, the bravery of explorers such as Lewis, Clark, and Pike, the entrepreneurial spirit of the fur trade, and the complex interactions with Native American tribes all contributed to this transformative era. As the United States continued its push into the unknown, the consequences of these early endeavors would become increasingly apparent, influencing the course of American history in profound ways. The seeds of manifest destiny, which would drive American expansionism for decades to come, were sown during this period, shaping the nation's identity and its relationship with the world. The westward expansion was not just a physical movement of people and goods, it was also a metaphorical journey into the unknown, driven by a sense of curiosity, adventure, and discovery. As we move forward, we must also acknowledge the complex legacy of this era, one that is marked by both triumph and tragedy, and strive to learn from the lessons of the past to build a better future for all. The expansion of the fur trade during this period played a crucial role in the development of these migration routes. The rendezvous system, which emerged in the 1820s, allowed trappers and traders to gather at predetermined locations, such as the annual rendezvous at Fort Bridger, to exchange goods, share information, and socialize. This system not only facilitated the growth of the fur trade, but also provided a network of trails, routes, and knowledge that would later be utilized by settlers and wagon trains. The likes of Jim Bridger, Kit Carson, and Jedediah Smith, who were instrumental in establishing this system, became legendary figures in the American West, renowned for their bravery, resourcefulness, and expertise. Their names would become synonymous with the Wild West, inspiring countless others to follow in their footsteps and push the boundaries of exploration and settlement. As the fur trade expanded, so did the number of early wagon trains that began to make their way across the continent. These journeys were fraught with challenges, including treacherous river crossings, disease, and encounters with hostile Native American tribes. The Donner Party's ill-fated expedition in 1835, which ended in tragedy, serves as a stark reminder of the perils faced by these early pioneers. Despite these risks, many settlers persevered, driven by the promise of land, opportunity, and a better life. Mountain men, who had spent years exploring and trapping in the region, played a vital role as guides and pathfinders for these wagon trains, sharing their knowledge of the terrain, Native American tribes, and available resources. Their expertise was invaluable to these early settlers, helping them navigate the unforgiving landscape and avoid potential dangers. The expertise of mountain men like Thomas Fitzpatrick, who guided the first wagon train to Oregon in 1830, was particularly notable. As more settlers arrived, initial American settlements began to take shape beyond the Mississippi River. Places like Independence, Missouri, and Westport, Kansas, emerged as crucial supply depots and jumping-off points for those embarking on the arduous journey west. The establishment of these settlements marked a significant turning point in America's westward expansion as the country began to assert its presence in the region and lay the foundations for future growth. These towns would become hubs of activity, bustling with traders, trappers, and settlers, all seeking to make their mark on the American West. In the midst of this rapid expansion, the relationships between Native American tribes, fur traders, and settlers grew increasingly complex. While some tribes, like the Shoshone and the Crow, formed alliances with the Americans, others, such as the Sioux and the Cheyenne, became wary of the encroaching settlement. The tensions that arose during this period would ultimately contribute to the conflicts that would shape the American West in the decades to come. As the 1830s drew to a close, America's westward expansion had gained momentum, driven by the development of migration routes, the growth of the fur trade, and the determination of settlers to forge new lives beyond the Mississippi River. The social dynamics of this era were equally fascinating, with the convergence of different cultures and lifestyles creating a unique melting pot. The rough-and-tumble world of the mountain men, with their rugged individualism and self-reliance, coexisted alongside the more refined and cultured atmosphere of the settlements. The trappers and traders, who had spent years living among Native American tribes, often adopted aspects of their culture, learning their languages and customs, and even forming close relationships with tribal members. This cultural exchange would have a lasting impact on the development of the American West, as different groups learned to navigate and interact with one another. The bravery and perseverance of the early settlers, who risked everything to build new lives in the unknown, continue to inspire us today. However, we must also acknowledge the darker aspects of this era, including the displacement and marginalization of Native American tribes, and the environmental degradation that resulted from the rapid expansion of human activity. By examining the complexities of this period, we can gain a deeper understanding of the forces that shaped the American West and work towards a more nuanced and inclusive understanding of our shared history. The era between 1821 and 1835 was marked by significant milestones, each of which contributed to the growth and development of the American West. The establishment of the Santa Fe Trail in 1822, for example, provided a vital trade route between Missouri and New Mexico, facilitating the exchange of goods and ideas between the United States and Mexico. The discovery of South Pass in 1824, a mountain pass that allowed settlers to cross the Rocky Mountains with relative ease, opened up new possibilities for westward expansion. And the founding of the American Fur Company in 1808, which played a dominant role in the fur trade, helped to establish the United States as a major player in the global fur market. As this ideology took root, it began to shape the country's foreign policy and territorial ambitions, influencing the decisions of politicians like President James K. Polk, who would later become a key figure in the country's westward expansion. The notion that the United States was destined to spread its influence across North America, bringing freedom, democracy, and civilization to the untamed territories, became an all-consuming passion for many Americans. This sense of mission and purpose would drive the country's actions for decades to come, often leading to conflicts with Native American tribes, European powers, and even within the United States itself. One of the first major tests of this ideology came in Texas, where American settlers had been arriving in large numbers since the 1820s, drawn by the promise of fertile land, economic opportunity, and a fresh start. As tensions between these settlers and the Mexican government grew, a movement for independence began to take shape, culminating in the famous Battle of the Alamo in 1836. The bravery and sacrifice of the defenders of the Alamo, including iconic figures like Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie, would become legendary, symbolizing the determination and resilience of American pioneers who were willing to risk everything for their vision of a new life. The Battle of the Alamo was more than just a pivotal moment in the struggle for Texas independence. It was also a powerful symbol of the clash between two cultures and two visions for the future. The defenders of the Alamo, with their rough-hewn determination and unwavering commitment to freedom, embodied the spirit of American expansionism, while the Mexican army, with its disciplined ranks and proud tradition, represented the established order of things. As the battle raged on, the outcome was far from certain, but in the end, it was the defenders' bravery and sacrifice that would inspire a rallying cry for the Texan rebels: "Remember the Alamo." After a series of battles, including the decisive victory at San Jacinto, Texas declared its independence from Mexico, establishing the Republic of Texas in 1836. This new nation would exist for nearly a decade, with its own government, military, and economy, before eventually being annexed by the United States. The birth of the Republic of Texas marked a significant milestone in the country's westward expansion, as it provided a foothold for American settlers to expand into the vast territories beyond the Rocky Mountains. Meanwhile, on the West Coast, early settlements were beginning to take shape in the Oregon Territory, where the establishment of the Oregon Trail in the mid-1830s had made it possible for settlers to travel overland from the Missouri River to the Pacific Ocean. Many were drawn to the region's fertile soil, abundant resources, and stunning natural beauty, including the majestic Columbia River Gorge and the rolling hills of the Willamette Valley. One of the most notable early settlements was the Willamette Valley, where a group of Methodist missionaries established a thriving community in the 1830s, complete with schools, churches, and farms. As more settlers arrived, tensions began to rise with Native American tribes in the region who were concerned about the impact of American expansion on their lands and way of life. The Cayuse, Nez Perce, and other tribes had lived in the Oregon Territory for centuries, developing complex societies and cultures that were intimately tied to the land. They watched with growing unease as American settlers cleared the forests, hunted the wildlife, and claimed the land as their own, often without regard for the indigenous peoples who had lived there for generations. These tensions were not limited to the Oregon Territory. Diplomatic relations between the United States and Britain were also becoming increasingly strained over the question of northwestern boundaries. The two nations had long disputed the border between the U.S. and British North America, now Canada, with the Americans claiming territory as far north as the 54-40 parallel, while the British insisted on a boundary at the Columbia River. This dispute would simmer for years, with both sides engaging in a series of diplomatic maneuvers and negotiations to resolve the issue. As the debate over territorial expansion continued to grow, politicians like President James K. Polk began to feel increasing pressure from their constituents to take bold action. The idea of manifest destiny had created a sense of urgency and expectation among many Americans, who saw the country's westward expansion as a matter of national destiny. This pressure would eventually contribute to the outbreak of the Mexican-American War in 1846. But in the years leading up to that conflict, politicians like Polk were already beginning to make their moves using a combination of diplomacy, negotiation, and military force to secure American interests and expand the country's territory. In the years leading up to the outbreak of war, Polk and other politicians walked a delicate tightrope, using a combination of diplomacy, negotiation, and military force to secure American interests and expand the country's territory. The disputed territory near the Rio Grande, where the borders of Texas and Mexico blurred together like a watercolor painting, was a particularly volatile flashpoint. It was here that a Mexican cavalry unit attacked a group of American soldiers in April 1846, killing 16 and capturing many more, prompting President Polk to ask Congress to declare war on Mexico. The die had been cast, and the fate of the region would be decided on the battlefields of the Mexican-American War. The war itself was marked by several key military campaigns, each one a masterclass in strategic maneuvering and tactical brilliance. The Battle of Palo Alto, fought on May 8, 1846, was a decisive American victory that showcased the superiority of the U.S. Army's artillery and infantry. The battle took place on a dusty, sun-scorched plain near the town of Brownsville, Texas, where the Mexican Army had assembled a formidable force under the command of General Mariano Arista. But despite being outnumbered, the Americans emerged victorious, thanks in large part to the brilliant tactics of General Zachary Taylor, who would go on to become a hero of the war. The Battle of Monterrey, fought in September 1840, was another crucial American victory, one that saw the U.S. Army capture the strategic city of Monterrey after a brutal and intense siege. The battle was marked by fierce house-to-house fighting, as American troops clashed with Mexican soldiers in the narrow streets and alleys of the city. In the end, the Americans emerged victorious, but at great cost. Over 400 American soldiers were killed or wounded in the battle, a stark reminder of the human toll of war. The Battle of Buena Vista, fought on February 22–23, 1847, was perhaps the most decisive American victory of the war. The battle took place near the town of Saltillo, Mexico, where a large Mexican army under the command of General Antonio López de Santa Anna had assembled to challenge the Americans. But despite being outnumbered, the U.S. Army held its ground, thanks in part to the brilliant tactics of General Taylor and the bravery of the American soldiers. The battle was marked by fierce fighting on both sides, with the Mexicans launching a series of desperate charges against the American lines. In the end, however, the Americans emerged victorious, having inflicted over 2,000 casualties on the Mexican army. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, signed on February 2, 1848, officially ended the war and resulted in Mexico ceding a vast amount of land to the United States, including present-day California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and parts of Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Wyoming. The treaty also established the Rio Grande as the border between the U.S. and Mexico, bringing an end to the long-standing dispute over the territory. But for the Mexicans who lived in the ceded territories, the treaty was a bitter pill to swallow. Many were forced to choose between becoming American citizens or retaining their Mexican citizenship, but few were given a genuine choice. Instead, they were often subjected to violence and intimidation, forced to adapt to new American laws and institutions that seemed designed to erase their cultural identities. The acquisition of this new land had a profound impact on the development of the United States, particularly with the discovery of gold in California in 1848. The California Gold Rush, as it came to be known, drew thousands of prospectors to the West Coast, leading to rapid population growth and the establishment of new towns and cities. The population of California grew from just a few thousand in 1848 to over 300,000 by 1852, putting a significant strain on the region's infrastructure and resources. As the gold rush continued to draw more and more people to the West Coast, the need for effective governance and management of the new territories became increasingly pressing. In an effort to address these issues, Congress passed the Compromise of 1850, a series of laws that established the boundaries of the new territories and provided for their governance. The Compromise admitted California to the Union as a free state, while allowing Utah and New Mexico to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. It also established the Texas-Pacific boundary and provided for the creation of new territorial governments in the regions acquired from Mexico. But despite its efforts to balance competing interests, the Compromise did little to address the long-term issues surrounding slavery and states' rights, which would continue to simmer and eventually contribute to the outbreak of the Civil War. The rapid expansion of the United States during this period had a devastating impact on Mexican and native populations who were often forcibly removed from their lands or subjected to violence and intimidation. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, for example, included a provision that allowed Mexicans living in the ceded territories to remain in their homes and retain their property, but few were able to exercise this right. Instead, many were forced to flee their homes, seeking refuge in Mexico or other parts of the United States. The Native American populations of the region fared no better, as they were forcibly removed from their lands and relocated to reservations. The trauma of this period would be felt for generations to come, a stark reminder of the darker aspects of American history. The vision of a rail line stretching across the continent, connecting the east and west coasts of the United States, had long been a topic of discussion among politicians, entrepreneurs, and explorers. The railroad companies turned to immigrant labor forces to fill the gap, seeking out men and women from diverse backgrounds who were willing to brave the unknown and face the numerous challenges that lay ahead. Chinese immigrants, in particular, played a crucial role in the construction of the railroad, with over 10,000 workers employed by the Central Pacific Railroad alone. These laborers faced incredibly challenging conditions, including treacherous terrain, harsh weather, and discriminatory treatment from their employers, who often viewed them as expendable and inferior. Despite these obstacles, the Chinese workers persevered, using their skills and ingenuity to overcome engineering challenges and construct feats such as the infamous Summit Tunnel in the Sierra Nevada mountains. As they toiled away, they also brought with them their own unique cultural practices, such as the celebration of the Chinese New Year, which added to the rich tapestry of traditions that were emerging on the American frontier. Irish immigrants also contributed significantly to the railroad's construction, with many workers drawn from the impoverished rural areas of Ireland. These laborers brought with them a range of skills, from carpentry to blacksmithing, and played a vital role in building bridges, tunnels, and other infrastructure necessary for the railroad's completion. The combination of Chinese and Irish labor forces, along with smaller groups of workers from other ethnic backgrounds, created a diverse and dynamic workforce that was essential to the project's success. As they worked together, they formed bonds and forged alliances that transcended their cultural differences, united by their shared goal of building a new life in America. As the railroad began to take shape, the federal government also turned its attention to the distribution of land on the Great Plains. The Homestead Act of 1862 allowed settlers to claim up to 160 acres of land for free, provided they lived on it and farmed it for 5 years. This legislation aimed to encourage westward expansion and provide opportunities for small-scale farmers and ranchers to establish themselves on the frontier. However, the reality of farming on the Great Plains proved to be far more challenging than many settlers had anticipated. The region's harsh climate, limited rainfall, and poor soil quality made it difficult to cultivate crops, and many settlers struggled to eke out a living. The landscape itself seemed to stretch out endlessly, a vast expanse of rolling hills, tall grass prairies, and rugged badlands that threatened to engulf the tiny settlements that dotted the horizon. Despite these challenges, immigrant communities from Europe and other parts of the world began to establish themselves on the Great Plains. Scandinavian settlers, for example, brought with them expertise in farming and livestock management, which they adapted to the unique conditions of the American West. They built sturdy farmhouses, planted hardy crops like wheat and oats, and raised cattle that could withstand the harsh winters and scorching summers. German immigrants, meanwhile, established thriving communities in areas such as Kansas and Nebraska, where they developed successful farms and ranches. These immigrant groups often formed close-knit communities, providing mutual support and assistance as they navigated the difficulties of frontier life. As the railroad pushed further westward, it facilitated the growth of these communities by providing access to markets, supplies, and other essential resources. The construction of rail lines also enabled the transportation of people and goods across the continent, linking the Great Plains to the rest of the United States and beyond. By 1876, the Transcontinental Railroad was complete, and the American West had been forever transformed. The legacy of this period would continue to shape the region's development for generations to come, as the United States continued its relentless march toward expansion and growth. The completion of the railroad marked a new era of possibility and promise, as the nation began to realize its manifest destiny, and the dreams of countless immigrants and settlers began to take root in the fertile soil of the American West. The impact of the Transcontinental Railroad was felt far beyond the Great Plains, as it connected the country like never before, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures. The railroad also had a profound effect on the indigenous populations of the region, who had long been displaced and marginalized by the westward expansion of the United States. As the railroad pushed further into Native American territory, it brought with it new challenges and conflicts, as the interests of the railroad companies and the federal government often collided with those of the native peoples. The legacy of this period would be marked by both triumph and tragedy, as the United States continued to grapple with its complex and often fraught relationship with the land and its original inhabitants. The iconic cowboy culture that emerged during this period was shaped by the harsh realities of life on the open range. Cowboys like Charlie Siringo and Nat Love became famous for their bravery, skill, and endurance as they drove cattle across hundreds of miles of unforgiving terrain. The myth of the American cowboy was born in this era, with its attendant trappings of rugged individualism, independence, and a deep connection to the land and the animals that roamed it. Cattle drives like the Great Chisholm Trail, which stretched from Texas to Kansas, became epic undertakings that required meticulous planning, precise execution, and a healthy dose of luck. The cowboys who embarked on these journeys faced numerous challenges, including sweltering heat, freezing cold, and torrential rains, as well as the ever-present threat of stampedes, predators, and hostile Native American tribes. As the cattle industry expanded, the U.S. government began to implement its reservation policy, forcibly relocating Native American tribes to designated areas, often with disastrous consequences. The trauma inflicted upon these communities during this period would have lasting impacts on their cultures, economies, and ways of life. The final phase of the Indian War saw the U.S. military engaging in a series of brutal campaigns against tribes like the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Comanche. The Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, where George Armstrong Custer's 7th Cavalry Regiment was decimated by a combined force of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors, marked a turning point in the conflict. This battle, which took place on a sweltering summer day in Montana, would become an iconic symbol of the clash between the U.S. government and Native American tribes. The introduction of barbed wire in the 1870s revolutionized the cattle industry by allowing ranchers to enclose vast tracts of land and protect their herds from predators and rival cattlemen. However, this innovation also sparked a series of fence-cutting conflicts between large ranchers who sought to consolidate their holdings and smaller operators who resented the enclosure of public lands. The most notorious of these conflicts was the fence-cutting war in Texas, where small ranchers and farmers, often aided by sympathetic cowboys, cut through the barbed wire fences erected by larger ranches, sparking a wave of violence and retaliation. This conflict, which lasted for several years, would ultimately lead to the decline of the open range and the rise of corporate ranching. As the open range cattle industry continued to grow, corporate ranching began to emerge as a dominant force. Large companies like the XIT Ranch in Texas and the Matador Land and Cattle Company in Kansas amassed enormous holdings, often through questionable means, and began to squeeze out smaller operators. The rise of corporate ranching marked the beginning of the end for the open range, as the era of free-grazing cattle and independent cowboys slowly gave way to a more industrialized and controlled system of livestock production. By the late 1880s, the American West had been transformed forever, its landscape dotted with fences, ranches, and towns, and its people bound together by a complex web of relationships, conflicts, and shared experiences that would continue to shape the region for generations to come. The impact of this transformation was felt far beyond the range itself. The growth of the cattle industry had created new markets and opportunities for entrepreneurs, from meatpackers to railroads, and had helped to fuel the rapid expansion of the U.S. economy. However, it also came at a terrible cost, as Native American tribes were forcibly relocated, their cultures destroyed, and their ways of life forever altered. As the American West continued to evolve and grow, it would never forget the sacrifices made by those who came before, nor the enduring spirit of the cowboys and Native Americans who shaped its history. The closing of the frontier also coincided with a series of mining booms that swept across the West, as prospectors and entrepreneurs flocked to areas rich in gold, silver, copper, and other precious resources. The mining town of Butte, Montana, became one of the wealthiest cities in the world during this period, its copper mines fueling the growth of the electrical industry and earning it the nickname, the richest hill on earth. The streets of Butte were lined with ornate Victorian mansions, elegant hotels, and bustling saloons where miners and speculators would gather to share tales of their adventures and fortunes. Similarly, the silver rush in Colorado's San Juan Mountains led to the establishment of boomtowns like Silverton and Telluride, which catered to the needs of miners and speculators alike, offering everything from rough-and-tumble bars to sophisticated opera houses. As the mining industry continued to expand, concerns about the environmental impact of resource extraction began to grow. The once pristine landscapes were now scarred by the ravages of mining, with toxic waste and pollution threatening the delicate ecosystems of the West. In response, conservation movements started to gain momentum, with advocates like John Muir and Gifford Pinchot pushing for the protection of America's natural wonders. Muir, a charismatic and passionate environmentalist, spent years exploring the American wilderness, from the misty redwood forests of California to the snow-capped peaks of Yosemite. His writings and advocacy helped to raise awareness about the importance of preserving these areas, and in 1890, Congress established Sequoia National Park in California, followed by Yosemite National Park in 1892, marking the beginning of a new era in national park conservation. The idea of the frontier and its significance in American history was further explored by historian Frederick Jackson Turner, who delivered his seminal essay, The Frontier in American History, at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Turner argued that the frontier had played a unique role in shaping American identity, fostering a spirit of rugged individualism, democracy, and westward expansion. His thesis sparked a lively debate among historians and scholars, with some hailing it as a masterpiece of historical interpretation, and others criticizing its limitations and biases. Turner's ideas resonated deeply with the American public, who saw on the frontier a symbol of their country's strength, resilience, and pioneering spirit. As the 19th century drew to a close, the legacy of Western expansion continued to shape American identity and culture. The idea of the Wild West became a powerful symbol of American strength and resilience, inspiring countless works of literature, art, and entertainment. These stories reinforce notions of manifest destiny and the idea that the United States was destined for greatness, its people chosen by fate to conquer and settle the vast expanse of the continent. The impact of Western expansion could also be seen in the changing demographics of the American population. As the frontier closed, many Native Americans were forced to adapt to a new way of life, one that was often marked by poverty, displacement, and cultural suppression. The once nomadic tribes were now confined to reservations, their traditional ways of life disrupted by the influx of settlers and the expansion of the railroad. Despite these challenges, Native American communities continue to thrive, preserving their languages, customs, and traditions in the face of overwhelming odds. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, remember that to understand the present, we must first understand the past.